We're here for my first live show, actually, for Raw with Uma. And we've got guests here in the studio. For those of you online, thank you for joining us. As usual, I do not know who my guest is going to be, and I've only just met her a few minutes ago. I don't know what questions she's going to ask me, but I'm sure our conversation today will resonate with many Asian women. And my goal with this show is really to put the Asian women on a global stage, because their stories matter, and if we're going to move the needle on gender, we first have to start with the last mile. Suvinder, welcome to Raw with Uma, and I know you are here because you have an important story to tell.
Thank you, Uma, for having me. Yes, I do, actually. I have an invisible disability, and I've had it for 25 years. So I'm standing here today, and it's like a miracle that I'm still here, honestly. So invisible disability I have is I had just gotten married, and I had a blood clot in my lung. And it turns out it's actually related to lupus. So my blood clots by itself inside my body.
Wow.
Yeah. So I almost died at that time. I didn't know I had it for like 2 months. I just thought I had a very bad flu until I was hospitalized, and then they took about 10 days to figure it out. So I've been on steroids, blood thinners, hydroxychloroquine, and all these wonderful medicines that have side effects, but keep me alive and working. So in my corporate life, 17 years of it was with this condition. And for 8 years, I've now been self-employed, partly because of this and partly because of my passion that I'm pursuing now. So it's been difficult. There have been many downs. I have had 7 surgeries, 3 very high risk. I almost died at 1. I had my ovaries removed, which was major surgery, because when you're on blood thinners, the anesthetist will tell you, have you got your affairs in order? And you're like, okay, So I had internal bleeding after the surgery, and 2.5 liters had leaked into my abdomen, and they had no idea where it's leaking from. So I'm on this OT table with the doctors trying to figure it out, and I'm awake because they won't put you out. So, and they found it. And so then I continued. And after I left corporate in 2016, I actually had brain surgery in 2018. It was benign, but it was a craniotomy. And that I really prepared for, like, worst case. So basically, I think people need to know that women go through a lot. Sometimes very silently. Sometimes you tell people and they just look at you like, are you making it up? Like, you look fine. So I think people should know. Yes. And I've tried over the years in my little ways to. So in my first job, I didn't disclose it. And later on, when I was in the last job where I was for longer, I did. And it worked in some ways and it didn't in some. So I was lucky. I think most of the time, it's important who your line manager was.
Yes.
So I had a very understanding one. And when I had that internal bleeding episode, she took leave and came to the hospital to be with my family. That was her level of commitment to her people. And you don't get that often.
So I'm curious, in your first job,
Yeah.
Why, in the first incident, why you chose not to say anything? What was that environment like that you didn't feel safe to be able to say that?
I think I was younger, and the issues compound over time. So I was younger. I was like maybe also in a little bit of denial, thinking,
Everything
what's the
will be
big deal?
fine.
I can do this. So I didn't feel the need to say because it wasn't really, I didn't have lots of things going on. I had appointments and all, and it was manageable. But the second instance, I did, because I was there longer, and the team was great. My line manager was great, and sometimes things got actually quite tough. So I needed some provision, some accommodation from them. Yeah.
Can you talk through that? Because I think this is a useful conversation for many.
Yeah.
And this is not often talked about because I think it's hard when you can't see something to recognize that it's in front of you, or it's something that you should be mindful about. And I think even for managers and leaders, it can be quite challenging to be reminded, unless firstly they are told, but also if I can't see it, probably doesn't exist.
Yeah, true. I mean, so I started to be a bit more open with the people I worked with. And
what did you say to them?
I mean, I just came out and said it like, okay, I've got this. It doesn't affect my work. My brain's still intact. And I can still do everything.
That's a great example. So I think a lot of women tend to, you say the first sentence, and then there's a justification right after that.
Yeah.
Well, I've had women tell me like, oh my God, Uma, I'm so sorry, but I'm pregnant, or anything that seems to be of inconvenience to the workplace. Yeah. And even if it isn't the case, we think we are an inconvenience.
Yeah, so that's the thing. I think I spent a large part of my corporate life feeling I've got to make up for it. I've got to say, look, I can do this. And look, I will work around it. I even planned some elective surgeries around work. Just to, I don't know, you feel you have to justify it, and you do, because otherwise people misconstrue it. So my theory is I'd rather just explain all the way to the end so you don't jump to a wrong conclusion, because if you do, then that's on you. But even with explaining all the way to the end, you have lots of instances where it's just disregarded.
Can you give me an example of how it's disregarded?
So, okay, this is a question I probably have for you, actually. Like, what advice would you have given me then? Because honestly, I did nothing about it at the time. So I had an episode of a suspected meningitis. And so the irony is I work in healthcare, in a healthcare provider. So I had suspected meningitis. I was in hospital for 10 days. And then I came home. It was bad. Part of the brain was affected. And so there was some memory issues and, just general, your brain working on full throttle wasn't happening. But I was working on a quite an important analysis, and I was hospitalized suddenly, so my computer wasn't with me. But they insisted that I need to be present in that meeting. I was on hospitalization leave. And my husband had to go to my office to get my laptop, and then for me to, refresh myself with the file. And then my husband was on the phone whilst I took this call. So he was on the home phone, and he heard our conversation. And I was drilled and badgered about the amounts and the exact amount. And you know, my one of my practices that I had was I made sure everything was transparent, everything was documented, because my background is in finance. So I was in corporate tax, so you know, the counter check, triple check, you know, that thing was always there. So I tried to explain everything that was already in the file.
What were they questioning?
They were questioning the exact amount, and I was trying to get through the file to run through
the
it.
Customers that you were processing.
It was a financial analysis for a sort of serious incident.
Okay.
And so it was all hush hush, and yeah. So
firstly, I am slightly shocked. Actually, I'm very shocked that. So a healthcare provider, while you are in hospital,
senior management person
has asked you to get onto a meeting to explain your work while you're in the hospital.
While I was on hospitalization leave at home.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. You are at home, but on hospitalization leave. Okay.
And they are medical people,
right?
Like medical trained, and they knew the diagnosis I had.
Right.
But they still did this for 20 minutes, and I had the worst headache after.
What do you think would have happened if you said no?
You couldn't say no.
And the reason you think you can't say no?
I couldn't. I had to do it.
Or?
Yeah, so that's the other angle. You're always, when you have a disability like this, you're not covered by medical insurance. You're not covered by anybody, really. And so yeah, you've got to live. You've got to safeguard your job. And I was good at my job. I was there for almost 12 years. I had always great appraisals, but I never got promoted. So it was a very ableist environment where if you have a disability, then your value is not the same. You know, so many things come with it. So yeah, I'm a person who takes pride in my work, and I want to do it well. And I thought, okay, I mean, it's all in the file. And you know, my line manager was in that meeting as well. There were like 4 people in that meeting. So I thought, okay, she's got my back. I mean, she did, but it just felt like I just cried after that. And then I had this spitting headache. I was like, okay, I think I might die right now, you know.
How much longer did you stay?
I stayed a year and a half.
Okay.
After that, probably about a year and a half. Yeah, I stayed a year and a half. Yeah, your question to me would probably be, why did I stay? You know, I was proof in that organization that support worked. That the line manager I had, she would work with you, with every person in our group, in our team, to really help you maximize your strengths. So I stayed mainly because of the team.
Yeah, and she was not your manager at the point that this incident.
She was, but there are some people in higher management. Sorry, who you know, like nobody wants to go up against.
Yeah, and this is workplace politics, right?
Yeah.
So a lot of times I get questions from women about, I don't understand why my manager isn't doing something, and I'm trying to get them to understand that their managers are picking their battles.
Yeah.
Because somebody higher up is probably putting a different kind of pressure on them that you can't see.
So one thing that I did ask myself was, okay, so what's getting in the way of me changing this narrative at work? So I thought, okay, so fire me, you know. So then I suddenly became quite vocal. I addressed things. I asked the difficult questions. And I was not popular. But that's okay, because I wasn't getting promoted anyway. But I was making a difference. So the irony is, I worked in a healthcare provider where I was helping the productivity and efficiency of this organization, who was serving people like me. But in my organization, my human condition was not.
Yes. It's quite rare that organizations walk the talk.
Yeah. So, but I stayed because I had things to finish. I was working on a project on an IT. I actually was in finance, but I did a lot of work in operations, IT, being the bridge between. Basically, there wasn't anything I couldn't do if somebody threw it at me. So that was my superpower in the workplace.
Yeah. So other than your promotion being sacrificed, when you had this switch to then have the courage to just say it out loud,
Yeah.
do you think there was any downside to that in hindsight?
No, not really.
Yeah.
Because I helped things move along, and I helped
Yeah.
other people, and I gave ideas to people who were wanting to get promoted. So I said, okay, then you work with it.
I'd love women to just listen to this part of what you just said, because yes, a lot of organizations I think still lead with fear,
Yeah.
and a lot of times we feel like we have to paddle a lot harder. We do generally as women, but to speak up and to have the courage, we have this voice in our head saying there will absolutely be a penalty. But more often than not, there is likely not that high of a risk, other than your promotion being sacrificed.
Or you being fired, I guess.
Yes.
For
Yeah. And I saw this video recently, and I think it's filmed in Africa, and this young black girl is asking this black older man, sir, how much disrespect should I take until I speak up for myself? And his response with, well, how much poison should you drink until you think you're going to die?
Yeah. Yeah. So I've actually, ever since my first job, I've been quite vocal, because I come from a family of 4 girls. So my dad was always like, what boys can do, you guys can do better. And we were like, yes.
Yep.
So even when I was in corporate tax, they didn't allow women to wear trousers to work. And, we went out to like Tuas and all these places. We were like, we want to wear trousers. So what we all did was 5 of us decided on a Friday, we were all going to wear a trouser suit to work. By 9:30 a.m., we were in the female partner's office
And
being addressed to say, until such time that HR policies changed, you will comply with it.
Wow.
We said,
What year
okay,
was
but
this?
today we get to wear trousers. So I've always been quite, sort of.
What year was that?
1995.
Okay.
1995.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes.
They changed it some years later.
But there is power in coming together. So, like, one of the things I talk about is, imagine, for example, you think about how valuable networks are in our career. And a lot of networking happens after hours, for which most women don't get to go to because they have to go home to care for their family, their kids, whatever, right? Especially here in Singapore, you live in multi-generational homes, which means not only do you have your parents, you have your in-laws, etc. So imagine if 5 men went up to the manager and said, we're leaving at 5 p.m. For sure, there would be no networking drinks happening.
Yeah.
Right? This is the power of banding together.
Yeah. That's true. Yeah.
So in hindsight, would you have done anything differently?
No. The only thing that I feel I didn't address was that instance when, it was quite extreme and he was quite senior. So I chose to do nothing. But on hindsight, I think I should have, but I would be going up against. So, yeah.
You're talking about the call that you had to take?
Yeah. But at least I think I should have voiced my concern with it. Maybe in this day and age, it's easier to do it. I think at that time, in 2015, may have been a little harder. But I guess it could have been even worse, because if it's now, then I would probably have been on a Zoom call.
Yeah.
I would actually be physically present as well.
Yes, yes.
So,
and I think the other important lesson I've learned is nothing is as urgent as it seems.
Yeah.
Somehow if you magically disappear for a few days or a few weeks, problems solve itself.
Yes.
Yes. But in that moment, emotions are high. So there's this logic over emotion piece that needs to come into play. And I have always found, at least with work, nothing actually is as urgent as it seems,
Yeah.
unless
So
it's a health or
Yeah.
something more personal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think a lot of women face a lot of issues at the workplace where they're not really heard. And when they're heard, somebody's already got their own version of it planned, and they're not really hearing you. So I think women just stop saying it. So the other question that I think everybody asks themselves is, how much do I say? Do I say at all? Is it going to help me? So the fact that I disclosed, I had some, accommodations done for me. My manager was quite flexible with me. Other people maybe didn't have the flexibility because they didn't say anything.
Yeah.
But then you get targeted by people because it's like, hey, what's so special about her? And then you get, snide remarks, you get comments, you get people trying to throw you under the bus because they think you've got some, and you're like, wait, this is not a preference anyone wants, So it is very hard.
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
Not an easy thing to do, but the thing that has worked for me, because it does get more political the higher you go.
Yes. So,
but doesn't mean politics doesn't happen on the ground. What has worked for me is anytime there's this, I call them noise around you.
yeah.
My first question is, are these people the ones that truly want what's best for you? And if they are not, then, for me, it's noise.
Yeah.
I only really want to listen to people who truly has my well-being, my success front and center to them.
Yeah.
Because then what they're going to say is not, well, why do you deserve special treatment? They would be saying things like, how can I make it easier for you? What support would you need?
Yeah. In those days, and in a healthcare provider, I think they don't really have any policies, documenting what help can be given. And I think generally in Singapore, disability is always physical, sensory, the development, and autism.
Yes.
And everything else is just, okay, it's not a disability. I did my master's in education, so I'm a private tutor. So I teach math and science, and I teach Olympiads as well to the kids who are boarding school. And I did my master's with a UK university, and I got a third off my fee because of my invisible disability. And in Singapore, it's not even recognized. And the other thing is lupus is not recognized under the chronic disease.
Right.
And lupus is never covered under any insurance anyway. And it's not under the chronic disease. So part of the advocating for myself that I did was I wrote to MOH
Right.
several times. They say
And that's
incidence.
Ministry of Health, yeah.
Ministry of Health. Incidence is not great. 5,000 people in Singapore is not a large number. And that's what they say every time. I wrote to a journalist, nothing. And I tried to get the doctors at the hospital. So I had this unique position where I've been a patient for 25 years.
Yeah.
And I've worked in healthcare that whole time. So I have both sides of the... So I tried to get doctors to, but they say they can't help. And I even wrote to the president, and I got no reply. So, I mean, it's probably feeble attempts, but I tried. I thought, somebody should hear this.
Yes.
But yeah, so if chronic disease program, which is government, I guess if they recognized more of these invisible disabilities, like so many people have immune conditions, and they're sort of living through it while being at work. So I don't know, what's your experience whilst you were?
I can't say I've ever been in your position, so I can't speak to that.
Right. No, but what is your experience with managing or seeing this in an organization where they were, able to have policies and.
Yes. A lot of it, I had the great experience of working for a really great company that put people first, that didn't look at what was in black and white. And so there was room for any sort of support that a human being might need in order to do their best work.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's situations that require them to take leave when that type of leave doesn't even exist in our policy.
Right.
And so I am very aware that it's few and far between.
Yeah.
But I had, the chance to experience, this is what it could look like. And it actually starts from the top. From the CEO down to the Asia president, etc. So, where it's like, let's do the right thing, versus, well, what does our policy say, and yes and no. So I think your story is a very important one. I hope it opens up discussions with so many others, not just women, who might be in a similar position. Who might be facing what you have faced before, and they get inspired by your story today. And the reason I do this show is that, so many of us, myself included, in corporate, we see diversity figures every quarter as part of our remit as senior executives. And behind those data are stories that are never told. And that's why I wanted to do this podcast. So this is an important story to be told. I know you're coming out, publicly after a very long time. So I applaud you for your courage to do that.
I think the 8 years away helped me to see things. So I think those stages when I thought I may have reached the end of life, I think it gives you a certain clarity and a certain, okay, I'm going to tolerate this and I'm not going to tolerate this.
So if you had what's the most useful thing that you've done to help you in this situation? I think a lot of people in the same boat might appreciate that. What was the most useful thing?
Okay, so what I did was I made sure that what I needed physically at the workplace, if I didn't get it, I got it myself. So I got myself a back-friendly chair.
Okay.
It was tough trying to get it approved to be brought into the office. But
maybe you should explain to everyone what's that. What's that chair?
Oh, okay. It was. It's basically a chair because I had a prolapse disc somewhere along the way, and I didn't do surgery. I didn't do anything, so I needed to always sit properly and have certain ergonomics at the office with my computer screen, and because basically it was a desk-bound job, and so it was a rather expensive chair. But it was worth it.
So you spent
I could
money
sit
yourself.
properly. I could sit straight up, and then the angles, I could adjust everything, and then the angle for your arms and the screen, and so you don't aggravate your situation basically. And I got a big screen on my own, and family supported me a lot on a lot of things, and then I made sure that my work ethics changed. Like I worked super on in the office during the hours I was there. Maximum 6:30, I was out of there. And unless it was exceptional, I didn't take anything home. And I had a break. And I actually, since day one of working, I never, ever had annual leave carried over, ever. I never had issues using it because my first manager had told me, the one thing, if you learn from me, is always take breaks. So I always took breaks. And I went out for lunch. I had breaks where I walked around. So that was work-related. And work-related, what I did was I documented everything. I documented processes of what I did. So everyone knew what I was doing. Everyone knew where to find it. And I used to have regular updates with people I worked with. Sometimes they didn't want to know. I was like, no, you need to know. Because if I drop off, which didn't happen that often, but sometimes it happened. So if I was suddenly not there, life goes on for work. So I put in place all those things, and I had regular updates with my line managers and communication. I just made sure everything was communicated to everyone. And I think because of that, I was like known as the historian in the office. If anyone wanted to find an email about something,
Yeah.
I could find it.
I love it. Okay, so make sure that the workplace, how you work, is suited for what you need.
Yes.
Make sure you have a support system around you.
Yes.
You talked about your family a lot.
Yeah.
Make sure you have boundaries. So take those breaks.
Yes.
Right, 6:30, switch off.
Yes.
And then make sure there's a disaster recovery plan of yourself. That
Yes.
everybody else knows
Correct.
your work, right?
Yes.
Okay, great tips. Thank you so much. And I like to ask every guest that comes to the show
I need to look here.
one question. Yes.
Yes.
And we're compiling this. So the one question is, what's the most important question you've asked yourself in order to move forward in life?
Okay, so mine's a two-parter.
Sure.
Okay, so the first part is, am I doing this for my heart or out of fear? Yeah.
Am I doing this from my heart or out of fear?
Yeah, because
love
I
it.
did a lot of that. The other is it going to honor my commitment to learning, growing, my spirituality, and is it going to fill my heart? Because, like, for me, my faith is me. I'm not me without my faith. So,
Yeah,
does it
that's like
sit-
a good anchoring question
yeah,
on where to give your time and energy.
yeah.
Yeah, I love it. Suvinder, thank you. I don't know what adjective to use for your story. But
Thank you for, creating this situation where I could share, because I've wanted to share for such a long time.
Yes, I know it took some convincing.
Yes, it did.
And my thanks to Emily, who's the producer of the show,
Yeah.
to get you here. So thank you so much. And you're doing it in front of a live audience and on a very special day. Today happens
yes.
to be your birthday.
It is.
Yes. So
It is.
what a way to celebrate.
Yeah.
For us here in the live audience, we'll do a little bit of a celebration later.
Thank you.
But I think, and I hope, it'll be one that you remember.
Yes, I think it's very important to be able to tell my truth on the day I was born. It's,
Yes. Yes.
yeah.
What a way to celebrate it.
Yeah.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Suvinder.
Thank you.
Ben, welcome to the show. You
Thank
are
you.
the CEO of World Vision, but you are here because of the topic, and this is something very close to your heart. Tell us more.
I have a pair of twins, a boy and a girl. Both of them are 10 years old. They were born extremely premature, week 25. They stayed in hospital for, both of them spent their first birthday in the ICU, and both have special needs. My daughter would probably not be able to live by herself. And because of that, because of that, I'm actually quite actively involved in the special needs community. I sit on the board of 3 charities, including 2 relating to persons with disabilities. And it's one of the things that pushed me into the nonprofit sector.
Yeah. So you've been listening to our conversation.
Yeah, if I may, I'd like to thank Suvinder for being so courageous in coming here, and also really to the family for being with her.
Yeah.
Through the surgeries that my children had gone through, that they went through, I've lost count of the number of times I wish I could suffer on their behalf. So thanks for standing by her. Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks for acknowledging that. Yeah.
And to everyone who's listening or watching, including online, I think it's useful to know that ever since I've become quite open about the challenges we go through as a family, it's actually a lot more prevalent than one might think. I don't have any stats, but that's just how it is. I've had people reach out to me. I've had people come talk to me, and it's the basis of me getting introduced to you.
Yes, we have a common friend who kindly did the introduction. And I think what you say that's so important, because with Suvinder's story and also what you're going to share, don't be surprised about the outreach you're going to get, where people are going to listen and go, oh my gosh, me too. And I'm not alone in this. Yeah.
A statistic that might be shocking to many is that about 70% of persons with disabilities never find employment. And out of those who find employment, nobody's actually tracking how many stay employed beyond the first 6 months, because 6 months is about the length of time that job coaches tend to shadow an individual, and after that, the individual's by himself or herself. So beyond that, the rate of dropouts is actually quite high. Singapore has actually made pretty good strides in terms of encouraging societies and workplaces to be inclusive. But the target by 2030 is 40% employed by 2030. So the bar is not high. There are challenges for employers as well. There are challenges certainly for employees. And it's not a particularly high ROI endeavor.
Yes.
From a societal governmental perspective. And I say this not because, and this is not unique to Singapore, right? If you take a step back outside of employment, and if you look at some of the proxies for well-being of a segment of society, I believe these are American statistics, but some of us would be really shocked to know that only 3% of sexual assaults against people with disabilities, 3%, are ever reported. There's a lot, we can do a lot better.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you work for World Vision, and I'm curious about how someone like Suvinder, had she been in your organization, what might have been her experience? And when I think about my tech world, at least the last company I was at, we had an allocation of only hiring people with disability. And to your point, it does cost the company more to make sure that they are catered for, they can work well, they need extra coaching, etc. But that quota, let's say, never shifted. And so we were always obliged. And even in the hardest of times, they were never allowed to be in the restructuring, etc.
Yes. Okay. I think it's great that companies use themselves as a platform to promote inclusiveness in different ways. I think it's great that there is I have somewhat mixed feelings about quotas, but I think it's great that there are targets, certainly. What we've done in my previous role is that we've actually experimented getting interns with intellectual disabilities. The program has since expanded from 6 to, I believe, 12. One of the underappreciated impacts actually is the culture of kindness and compassion that it could end up fostering even among regular able-bodied employees. And that's actually a benefit that I think really ought to be looked at a little bit more carefully, provided it is appropriately managed. Appropriately managed meaning I'm aware of employers that would adjust the salaries, right, depending on the amount of work the person with disability is able to generate, so that it remains commensurate, so that there is no unhappiness among other staff members.
Yes.
And I think that's to be quite candid. I think that's fair as well. As a parent to children with disabilities, I think it makes employment more sustainable. For us in World Vision, so we are a humanitarian organization. If we think about the needs in countries that are people living in abject poverty, facing discrimination, subject to violence, and susceptible to natural disasters, we operate in the area where the 4 Venn diagrams intersect. So, which means that within a 2-hour flight radius of Singapore, some of the audience may be shocked to know that there are people living without running water, living without electricity, and where there is people trafficking across borders. So that's kind of the segment that we operate. As a non-profit organization, we are not exactly inundated with job applicants,
Yeah.
and we tend to have to be quite selective as well.
Yeah.
Right. So we haven't had a single applicant in the year and a half that I've been with the organization from anyone with disabilities. So I can't really answer the question.
Yeah.
Clearly, I would be quite happy to make accommodations. We just haven't been faced with that yet.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm thinking about what she was sharing in terms of the pressure that she was under to keep her job and to maybe paddle even harder to make sure that she was making up for the lost time or the lesser work being done, right? And these are the types of pressures that actually women face in the workplace, just generally speaking, but then now you add hidden disabilities or even visible disabilities to it, it compounds, right? This is the intersectionality that just adds on to it. So I'm just curious from your experience, World Vision or not, you obviously know a lot of women and men, others in the industry. You've been here for a long time in Singapore. What might be advice that you might give out to women out there as a very active male ally?
It is difficult for me to differentiate between the advice I could give to women versus men in this particular case. In the journeys that I have seen, there is much brokenness. There is a lot of stigmatization. There is a lot of stigma. And you have actually quite a large proportion of people carrying that and continuing to hide that. And I'll just give you one example. In the role that I had to play in a previous organization, I was on the way to a board meeting. And when the plane landed, I got like 7 missed calls from my wife, who told me that my daughter was hospitalized and could I come back. So at the point in time, there was no option. And that was the time when I had to be really, really open. I wasn't consciously trying to hide it, but there was a concern about, I suppose, unspoken concern about not wishing to be defined by limitations, but to be empowered by potential, right? But at the point in time, it was a moment of truth. I just had to, know, at least let the chairman know why. I was turning back at the airport and I was flying right home. I've actually, within a 6-month period, I left 200 people in a ballroom at an offsite that I had organized because I could not be there. But along the way, I've also had colleagues coming to me to thank me for letting them know that this was happening. And in particular, there was a lady who had been struggling because she had a 13-year-old with special needs kept at home. And none of her colleagues knew about it because there was such a sense of shame and stigma.
Yes.
There wasn't necessarily a reason that was clear to me why she felt the need to hide it, but it was a overall societal, just being very hesitant to speak up. And her manager beside her was in tears because she had been rated as an underperformer for the past 13 years.
Oh, and
correct.
He or she didn't know.
She didn't know. And when you work in an operational role, when there's a flight delay, there are passengers to be handled. If an employee consistently says at 4:30, I have to go, without giving a reason, you can kind of sympathize,
yeah.
right? So there's a lot of burden that actually is also being carried by the caregivers as well. And I've seen the pressures that can build, and hence the acknowledgement that I felt I had to give to the family members.
Do you see any downside in people disclosing?
The question is, what upside are we really trying to gain by not disclosing? If the downside is it shuts us out of certain roles, from my perspective, so be it.
Yeah.
right? I mean, let's acknowledge that we have we have constraints. We have choices we need to make in terms of what is important and what isn't. And I think, and I feel that disclosure is a part of is a part of getting clarity for each individual, right? We can't be all things. We can't be all things. We may not wish to be all things.
Yeah.
And more often than not, when there is disability involved, there are just constraints that one has to face up to and to prioritize, in my view at least. Right. So so to give an example, I had a role that required me to travel maybe sometimes up to 75% of the time. I decided that it just wasn't really worth it. Could I have carried on? Actually, I could have. And the travel itself is just one of the many factors that I decided that it would be wrong to keep going. But when I faced up to that constraint, when I acknowledged the constraint, suddenly there was a lot more clarity in terms of what are the viable paths ahead that could lead to happy outcomes, not just for myself, but for my colleagues, for my family.
Yeah. And I think that's an important one, because a lot of times, especially as women, we usually see who's done the role before. I had once, a friend who was after the CEO job for a global nonprofit, and the man who was doing the role before her traveled 80% of the time. And she was like, there's no way I can do that.
Yeah.
And the question I asked was, just because he did it that way, why do you think you have to do it that way? Right? Because I think there's different ways to get to the same outcome. I think in the first year, it's always, heavier. I traveled 192 days, in the first job, in my first year. So, but there's always different ways. You have to weigh that out for yourself, but you don't have to do it the way somebody else, And I think recently, with Sushan now going to step in as the new DBS CEO, and she publicly said, yes, Piyush has big shoes to fill, but that's his shoes, right? It's not my shoes.
I stayed in that position that required a lot of travel for a total of about 5.5 years. I was quite familiar with where there are constraints. Sometimes those are hard constraints, right? When there's an operating role, for example, in the example that I gave, right? If you're in an operating position, if you're a receptionist,
Yeah.
there are certain expectations that are placed on top of that role. It's not possible to work from home. You can't work from home if you're in retail. You can't do it if you're working in F&B.
Yeah.
Right. So I think a part of seeking to do the role differently is also clarity in terms of what is an individual's constraints.
Yeah.
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 Yeah. And just being clear about that.
Yeah. Absolutely. So she talked about all the things that she did in order to make it work for her, right? We talked about making sure the work environment is there, the support of the family and the friends, creating boundaries for herself, always a difficult thing to do.
Yeah.
Anything else you might add to that?
No, I thought Suvinder's been living with this for a long time. She's
Yes.
had a long time to adapt.
Yeah.
It feels like there's a period of a trial and error as well. And I just feel that she's ended up in a really good place. Acknowledging that that there are perhaps boundaries is a more empowering way to express what I just said as well, right? In terms of the word that I used was constraints, because that's how I thought about it, and the boundaries and expectations that I set was a reflection of the things that personally I was willing or not willing to do. So, like you, I live on time. I'm very clear that I'm happy to run a second shift. I'm quite happy to run a second shift between 10 p.m. to 2 a.m. Simply because I sleep better when I clear away stuff. I'm not suggesting it's the best practice, but it's just something that I like to do.
But you
I
don't
think
expect
having
your
the
team
clarity-
to work at that hours.
Absolutely
Yes.
not.
Yeah.
Absolutely not.
Yeah,
No.
which is always important,
Yeah.
right? Because I think as the most senior person, I think like we used to have under our signature, my working hours may differ from yours.
Yep.
Please don't feel obliged, right? That's important.
Well, my team knows.
Yeah.
They know that it's going to be really hard to reach me at certain time slots. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Did anything change during the pandemic? Like for me, I was very strict about the 5:30 p.m. and I told my team that if anything was urgent, you're going to call me, but I'm not going to look at emails till the next day. And that was actually the period where I realized a lot of things solve themselves. Actually, when you don't need, not the things that are urgent aren't actually urgent.
There is a significant difference, and I say this as someone who's lived on both sides, between working for a large global enterprise and working for what is effectively a small to medium enterprise. And there is an even bigger difference if one picks the path of an entrepreneur, right? So entrepreneurs, I think, will have a much harder time switching off.
Yeah.
And and teams in small companies, quite often, or family-owned firms, don't necessarily have quite the same level of resourcing to say that I'm not going to look at emails past 5:30. I think it's a matter of deciding what works and which environment and what's the type of environment under which we will thrive and be successful and be happy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
But you asked about COVID. So
Yeah.
COVID was great because there was actually a little bit of resistance when I implemented flexible working practices. There was an expectation that people showed up in the office, and when I saw someone coming to the office at 4:30, I'm like, "Why are you here?" "Oh, I'm just down with a customer meeting." And how long did it take for you to get here? Half an hour. It's like, and there was actually a little bit of hesitation when I said that, look, if you have customer calls outside, and I actually prefer not to see the sales team in the office.
Yes.
There was a bit of a cultural aversion to that. I think COVID kind of forced that on everyone. So there was the period where it became really useful to discern what was actually necessary and what wasn't.
Yeah.
Yeah. The portion that I think remains to be will be interesting to observe is that if I think back about certainly my career, the deepest and most important and most meaningful friendships are forged face to face, right? So when you reduce the surface area of face to face interactions, what does that do in terms of workplace dynamics over the longer term? Now there are things that you gain as well, for sure, right? But what would change?
At what cost?
What would change over the coming decade? I think would be interesting to see.
Yes, yes, and especially when teamwork and collaboration is key for that organization, which should be for everyone.
So when I had this conversation, I was reminded that people who game, if you do online gaming, the teamwork and collaboration is very real. And so are the friendships, and that feeling of affinity, that trust. You've got my back. When we go around this corner, it's quite real as well.
Yeah.
Is just not necessarily well adapted to workplace practices for the time being, right? Which is why I don't think it'll necessarily be better or worse. It'll just be different.
Yeah, absolutely. Ben, it was great to have you on the show. And I'm going to ask you that one question that we ask everybody. What's the most important question you've had to ask yourself in order to move forward in life?
What's the most important thing that I need to do in the coming 12 months and why? I think like getting the clarity reminds us to prioritize. It doesn't mean that you drop everything else. It simply means that keeping in mind what's really important. And being super clear as to why that's the case.
Yeah. Okay, so you introduce kind of a recency, next 12 months, to try and be focused.
Yes.
So what is that for you in the next 12 months?
Setting from a personal perspective, so I kind of divide there is an element that's work, there's an element that's personal. From a personal perspective, I'd really like to see how far we can go with the interventions that are specific for my daughter. Right? So she's 10 years old. She's nonverbal. She's not toilet trained. She can't take solid food. So we have broken several perhaps self-imposed limitations over the past 12 months in that we didn't think we could ever travel.
Wow.
We don't think we could ever travel, but we survived. We survived Penang. And then we tried Taiwan, and we survived Taiwan.
Wow.
Now we're going to go Shanghai, right? So there are logistical constraints because we have to bring a blender, we have to bring a transformer, and those things are heavy, and it does constrain what we can do.
Yeah.
We can't be too adventurous. We have to be near to a power supply. We'll probably never be able to go camping in Mongolia, but that's fine. I'm not sure we can ever go to Europe again. But it's certainly broken a barrier that has been in our heads, that's been there for a long time. Yeah, I'm quite determined to socialize them as far as possible, and it helps that we have developed a really thick skin from very early days because both my kids were discharged with feeding tubes. So there's no disguising that they're different. They had feeding tubes taken off the nose.
Right.
My daughter was discharged with oxygen. So we had a stroller and we had a separate trolley with an oximeter, with a beeping oximeter and an oxygen tank. So there's no disguising.
Very visible.
Yeah, it's highly visible. But it's been really helpful as well. Because again, you are confronted with a trade-off. Do you keep them at home? And if so, is that the right thing to do? And if you want to do that, why?
Yeah.
Right. So I can tell you that we are so fortunate to have that choice because when I visit some of the areas in which we work, people with disabilities are confined at home and not out of any reason such as stigma, right? It's because if you're born with a bad leg and live in a place where wheelchairs do not work because the terrain is rocky or muddy, you stay at home because that's and I think and I think people all know that when you do that to a child, there's a lot of impact to cognitive development as well. Right? So, but in Singapore, and well, in many parts of the world in which we come from, we have a choice. Right? We have a choice.
All right. Well, that's a wrap today. And if you're hearing this message, you've just listened to a new episode all the way to the end. And for that, I thank you for the generosity of your time. For those of you online, thank you for joining us today. To wrap up, my few points from this episode. It was, a very heavy one for me. And I thank Suvinder for having the courage to come in, tell her story. I learned so much from the conversation, especially just having the courage to speak up in the workplace, to then think about, how she might be helpful to others, thinking about how she's herself is going to make things that are around her work best for her. And then you heard from my co-host today, Ben, who shared his perspective as a father of 2 children with autism and how he's dealing with that as a leader and how being transparent, there's actually no downside. So if you're somebody that resonated with the episode today, I'd love to hear. What else did you take away from this conversation? And I'd love to hear what you think. So please follow, like, and leave a comment, and I promise to read all of them. If you enjoyed this episode, share it with your friends. And if you'd like to be a guest on the show, check out the link to send in your details. I'll see you soon.